My name is Russ. I run cattle across 40 acres that my grandfather carved out of the wilderness with nothing but sweat, determination, and his own hands. I don't wear a uniform. I don't have an impressive title after my name. But tucked away inside an old filing cabinet is a single sentence written into an aging property deed. That one sentence says the electrical line feeding the neighborhood's elegant $2.4 million clubhouse crosses my land, and it does so only because I've allowed it to. Nobody living in Meadowbrook Ranch Estates knew that little detail. Not yet. Everything started over a fence post. A cedar post stood about 6 inches outside what Deborah Whitfield claimed was HOA code. According to the laminated violation sheet she personally stapled to my front gate, it was unacceptable. She arrived carrying her usual clipboard, expensive sunglasses resting on top of her head, while her spotless white SUV sat idling in my driveway as though it owned every piece of gravel leading to my house. "Rustic charm only goes so far, Russ," she said confidently. "This is a managed community." I didn't answer. She scribbled another note on her clipboard, climbed back into the SUV, and drove away. That clipboard seemed to follow her everywhere. Exactly 2 weeks later, a certified envelope appeared in my mailbox. Violation notice. The list included non-compliant fencing, agricultural odors, and, my personal favorite, excessive use of natural landscaping. Attached was a $400 fine along with a warning that a lien would be placed against my property if payment wasn't received within 30 days. I called the HOA office. The exhausted administrative assistant answered and read the bylaw number listed in the notice. Then I politely asked her to read it again. She did. The problem was that the bylaw didn't actually exist in the recorded covenants. I knew because I'd studied every page of those covenants years earlier when I signed the easement agreement. Deborah had been enforcing rewritten rules that had never been officially filed or legally adopted. I kept that discovery to myself for the moment. Instead, I paid the fine and waited. A week later, she returned. Same white SUV, same clipboard, same attitude. "You're testing me, Russ." I looked over from feeding my cattle. "I'm feeding cows, Deborah." She folded her arms. "This neighborhood exists because I turned it from an empty dirt lot into a lifestyle brand." It was a ranch long before it became a brand. She didn't appreciate that reminder. She pulled out her phone and photographed my propane tank, claiming it was visible from the cul-de-sac. Then she sped away, throwing enough gravel behind her tires to pepper my boots. Friday morning brought something worse. Several men wearing HOA polo shirts were standing on my property line. No phone call, no warning, no knock at the door. They had already cut the padlock securing my utility access gate, my gate, along the easement so they could inspect the electrical line serving the clubhouse. In the process, they smashed 3 fence panels. Then they left the gate standing wide open. My cattle wandered onto the county road. I spent the next 4 hours chasing frightened livestock through steady rain because Deborah Whitfield wanted someone to inspect a transformer she neither understood nor had any legal authority to access. That was the moment the patient side of me stopped talking. The practical side reached for the phone. Not to call the sheriff. I called my attorney. Deborah responded that same afternoon by reporting me to the police. Her complaint accused me of trespassing on my own property. 2 deputies arrived already looking embarrassed. Deputy Alvarez recognized me immediately. He'd grown up just a couple of roads away and knew exactly whose name appeared on the deed. "Ma'am," he told Deborah calmly, "this property belongs to Mr. Russ. The easement supports community infrastructure." Deborah's voice sharpened. "The HOA board controls shared utilities." Alvarez shook his head. "Ma'am, the board doesn't own that power line. He does." She instinctively raised the clipboard like it could protect her. This time it couldn't. What nobody in Meadowbrook Ranch Estates had ever bothered to ask was a very simple question. Where does the subdivision actually get its electricity? The answer reached back 60 years. A right-of-way easement granted by my grandfather, renewed later by my father, and for the last 4 years held solely in my name. Not the county's, not entirely the utility company's. Mine. A private easement agreement that could be revoked with 90 days written notice if anyone violated the conditions requiring reasonable access and non-interference. Cutting my padlock, breaking my fences, leaving my cattle loose, entering without notice. Every one of those actions qualified as interference. Every one of them had been documented with date. She walked to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and confidently told the 60 homeowners gathered inside that the issue with the electrical service was simply a misunderstanding that was already being handled through the proper legal process. Then Marcus Feld, the HOA treasurer, slowly rose from his seat. For nearly 3 years, he had sat through Deborah's endless clipboard inspections without saying much. That night was different. "It's not a misunderstanding," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the room. "I have the emails." The room fell silent. She knew about the easement 2 years ago. She rewrote the bylaws herself and never informed the rest of the board. He wasn't making accusations without proof. Marcus had brought printed copies of the email chain. One by one, he handed them down each row of chairs until they spread through the audience like church bulletins on a Sunday morning. For the first time anyone could remember, Deborah's confidence disappeared. Her voice trembled. "You don't understand everything I've built here." Marcus looked directly at her. "You built it on his land," he replied, "and with his power. Exactly 90 days after my certified notice had been delivered, at precisely 6:47 on a Saturday evening. The deadline arrived. The clubhouse was hosting one of its expensive fundraising galas. A string quartet played softly near the entrance. Hundreds of decorative lights glowed across the perfectly manicured lawn. Deborah had recently spent nearly $4,000 having the clubhouse exterior professionally repainted. Then, right on schedule, everything went dark. Every chandelier inside the building, every outdoor speaker, every fountain pump, every decorative landscape light. All of it shut off at the exact same moment. Nobody in attendance needed an explanation. Everyone already knew. The fallout came faster than anyone expected. County officials fined the HOA for making unauthorized alterations within a public access easement. Before the month was over, Deborah resigned from the board. Her farewell email claimed she was stepping down for personal reasons. No one believed that explanation. The contractors who had cut my lock and entered my property without permission were each cited for trespassing and property damage. The HOA's insurance company ended up paying the claims. When autumn arrived, the neighborhood elected an entirely new board. Marcus earned one of those seats. The first official action they took was sending me a formal written apology. The second was sitting down with my attorney to negotiate a legitimate, permanent utility agreement with clear terms that protected both sides. Everyone signed. 3 weeks later, electricity returned to the clubhouse, this time under a completely different agreement, and with a completely different attitude. After that, nobody ever left one of my gates open again. Nobody chased my cattle onto the county road. Nobody treated my property as though it belonged to the HOA. I never felt much like celebrating. The following morning, I sat on my porch holding a cup of coffee that slowly went cold while the morning fog drifted away from the eastern pasture, just as it had every sunrise for decades, whether people were arguing or getting along. Later, I walked the section of fence Deborah's crew had destroyed. I replaced one more panel than was actually necessary. While I worked, I wasn't thinking about Deborah. I was thinking about my grandfather. I wondered what he would have thought about a luxury clubhouse worth millions losing every light it had because someone decided to ignore a simple padlock on an old ranch. There wasn't any real joy in the outcome, just a deep sense of quiet. About a week after the new utility agreement was finalized, I opened my mailbox and found an envelope with no postage. Someone had delivered it by hand. Inside was a child's drawing. It showed a colorful crayon map of the neighborhood. My ranch sat on one side. The clubhouse stood on the other. Between them was a single bright yellow line labeled, in careful handwriting, the Power Road. Across the bottom, the child had written, "Thank you for the lights." I smiled. That drawing went straight onto my refrigerator. It's still hanging there today. So now I've got a question for you. If someone carrying nothing more than a clipboard and an important title started changing the rules on land that was never truly theirs, would you respond the way I did? Quietly, patiently, and with the paperwork to back it up? Or would you have let it go just to avoid the conflict? Tell me what you would have done in the comments. I read every single one.